So let's talk about phonation. Phonation is the act of making sound. It's the coordination of the breath and the vocal folds. And during phonation, the singer's primary task is to get the most efficient balance between the flow of the airstream and the muscles of the vibrator. So let's talk about the anatomy just for a bit. The larynx is made up of three different cartilages: the thyroid cartilage, the cricoid cartilage, and a set of arytenoid cartilages. The thyroid cartilage serves as the housing for the vocal folds. You can physically see the thyroid cartilage from the front of your neck. That's your Adam's apple. The cricoid cartilage is at the base of the larynx, and it forms a complete circle around the base and looks something like a men's class ring or maybe a championship ring. And then the arytenoid cartilages will sit on the top surface of the cricoid cartilage, and they're attached to the vocal cords. When you begin to sing or speak, the muscles will move the arytenoids and the vocal folds closer together. There are many different sets of muscles that connect the different parts of the larynx together. However, we're not going to go into those in detail. The only one that you really need to know is the thyroid arytenoid muscles. And as the name suggests, thyroarytenoid, it connects the thyroid cartilage to the arytenoid cartilages. So why is that important, you ask? Well, that's important to know because those muscles, the thyroarytenoid muscles, are the vocalis muscles, or we call them the vocal cords. So now that you have just a basic understanding of your larynx and the vocal cords, let's kind of talk about how it works. As the vocal folds start to come together, the pressure of air beneath the folds rises, and the speed of the flow of air increases as it goes through the opening, and we call that the glottal passage. You might have heard of that, the pressure of air beneath. You might have heard that called subglottic pressure, or maybe you can think of it even as breath support. Now that's a very scientific explanation of what's happening, but basically what's happening is your breath is trying to escape. However, your brain has told your vocal folds to come together, and this stops the flow of air. And in order for the air to release, the air pressure has to reach a certain amount, and when it finally reaches that amount when it can go through, a bubble of air will go through the folds, causing the folds to open and come back together. And this opening and closing is the vibrating that creates sound. It creates our singing voice, and really any other sound that we can create with our voice. The opening and closing of the vocal folds is the vibrating that creates sound. The act of the vocal folds opening and closing is called, and this is very scientific, so I don't want to lose you here, but it's called the aerodynamic myoelastic phenomenon. And really simply, this is just the flow of the breath through the glottis creates the Bernoulli effect, and that's an effect known in physics where when gas is moving, like the breath flow, there will be a decrease in pressure. So when the vocal folds are close enough together, the low pressure exerted on them will literally pull the vocal folds together. This is the aerodynamic aspect of the vocal folds coming together. The myoelastic part is just the muscles of the vocal folds, bringing them the rest of the way closed, or the opening, the releasing of the vocal folds. And the process of bringing the muscles of the vocal folds together is called adduction, and the separating of the folds is called abduction. There are really two types of phonation that we as singers want to avoid, and the first one is the breathy sound. The second is the glottal plosive, or the glottal attack. Now, let's talk about the breathy sound. When the breath is flowing before the vocal folds have fully adducted, or if the folds don't have a tight enough seal, there will be a leak in airflow, and this causes a breathy sound while singing. I like to sometimes tell my students it's the Britney Spears sound that we want to avoid. The other type of phonation we want to avoid is the glottal attack or the glottal plosive. And during the glottal plosive, the arytenoids literally are slammed together and breath pressure is applied to overcome the muscular tension. And when you do this type of attack, there's literally an audible pop that you can hear when this attack occurs. The larynx is extremely constricted and raised in the throat, and the arytenoids are pressed so tightly together. And this glottal attack can be so harmful to our voice. And oftentimes, too much tension in our singing posture or too much tension in the neck can be the cause of tension in our vocal cords or in our larynx. And when we get this tension, there's much more likelihood that this glottal attack will happen. And that's why it's so important to not have any tension in your body while singing. Now, while both of these attacks are undesirable, the breathy sound actually won't cause any damage to your vocal cords. It really is just an inefficient way to use the breath. For young singers, it is much more helpful to their voices to have a more breathy or more kind of middle voice, head voice type of sound, so that they get used to singing. But as you develop and you get into high school and college, you really want to avoid that breathy attack. For lower notes, lower subglottic pressure is needed, or less breath pressure is needed. For higher notes, obviously, higher breath pressure is needed. The biggest temptation that singers will face is to decrease the airflow and increase the subglottic pressure, that breath pressure. And doing this will only create a stiff and pressed sound. You constantly need airflow. It's just like playing any kind of musical instrument. You have to blow air through the instrument for the entire phrase. If you don't have a continuous airstream, your tone quality will suffer, and the same is true for singing. You always send the breath to the ends of phrases, and this will help you. It'll help with healthful singing as well as staying in tune. If you aren't singing correctly, your sound may be constricted, raspy, hoarse, breathy, weak, inconsistent, or shaky. However, when you're singing with a healthy and good vocal sound, it will be freely produced, pleasant to listen to, flexible, vibrant. You'll be able to hear the energy flowing smoothly from note to note, and it will be rich, ringing, and resonant. And that is a good segue into our next topic, resonation. Resonation is the process by which the basic product of phonation is enhanced in timbre and or intensity by the air-filled cavities through which it passes on its way to the outside air. Some of the other terms you might have heard to define resonation are amplification, enrichment, enlargement, improvement, or intensification. Most pedagogical authorities, however, don't like these terms because they don't really accurately explain what's happening. Now, there's two basic types of resonation, sympathetic and conductive. Let's talk about conductive. Conductive resonance occurs during singing, and it's the vibration that you feel in your body, and it's a result of conductive resonance. These vibrations travel along your bones and cartilages and muscles of your neck and chest and head. Now, sympathetic resonation is created by the vibrations of your vocal cords traveling through air from the larynx and then into the cavities of the throat and the head and setting them into vibration. And many factors can affect the characteristic of a resonator, such as the size, the shape, the type of opening, the composition, and the thickness of walls. So let's talk about some of the different resonators in our body, and we'll begin with the chest. Now you can feel resonation occurring in the chest by placing your hand on your chest and saying a word like boom or any other syllable ending on M. An NG ending also works well to feel that. The larynx itself is actually a resonator. However, because it's so small, it's really only a resonator for really high frequencies. Moving up to the pharynx or the throat, that's the most important resonator because it's the first cavity of any real size for the vibrations to pass through. And that's why a lowered larynx and the tongue out of the throat are really important while singing because it creates that open throat. The second most important resonator is the oral cavity. Like the throat, the oral cavity can change shape or can change its dimensions. The tongue, the soft palate, the jaw, the lips, and the shape of its front and back openings can alter the sound. It's really important to have a raised soft palate and a lower jaw to create the necessary space for resonation. And that's why teachers are always harping at you to drop your jaw and use tall vowels. Moving up to the nasal cavity, this is a much less important cavity, and really we only use it for three sounds, M, N, and NG. So now what, you ask? Well, now that you know about resonation and which resonators are important, we can talk about how to get into a position that will help you create beautiful resonance. First of all, the position of the larynx should be comparatively low, like I mentioned earlier, and should stay there, not really going up or down a lot. As you begin a yawn, you can feel the larynx begin to lower. And I want you to try that right now. Just take a deep yawn. And if you want, you can place your hand gently on your Adam's apple. And as you begin to take that yawn, you will actually feel the Adam's apple descend down a little bit. Good. Now, the yawn position is a really good way to get the larynx into that position. Okay, and you also want an open throat. And honestly, the best way to keep an open throat position is just to maintain that feeling of a yawn that we worked on a minute ago. Okay, with an open throat, you will bring out low partials. You'll be able to adjust to or tune to different pitches coming out of the larynx, and you can also absorb undesirable high partials. You can also preserve the character of your tone. And then finally, your soft palate should be really high. Okay, and if you'll focus on all of these things, focus on doing all of these things while you sing, it will help you create a more beautiful sound as you sing.